Hey guys, this is Mike. Welcome back to Fright Flicks, and we're going into the final two episodes here of Scream Queens. We've been waiting a long time for our killer reveals, and this is going to be the first of two. They gave us two, we're going to give you two. There's a lot to talk about. I went through everything, and this is even coming up a little bit late because there's just there's just so much to go into. So what ended up happening is me and Nate had to record these separately, which I'll get into that story probably after Nate's review, but it feeds into the idea that we said we were going to do a reaction video, and there is a reaction video out there, but I am debating on what exactly to do with that reaction video, being how everything played out. Now, I'll get into that a little bit later, and we'll see if it ever sees the light of day. Anyway, one thing that I wanted to make sure that we did was, after watching the episodes twice over the last few days, I wanted to make sure that we did separate reviews. This is just because I wanted to make sure that Dorcas basically gets separated from the stank of the final girls. You know, spoiler alert, we all kind of know where that's going, but, you know, they were made separately. Let's review them separately, get into it, so it'll be my review, Nate's review, and then afterwards I'll get into maybe some other stuff. We'll see. Another thing is the killer congratulations. That will be up, that is coming. That will be next week, because I would like to be able to do that with me and Nate in the same room, and we'll do a full season review and some other fun stuff along with that one. So that'll be next week. Don't worry, I didn't forget about you guys who guessed right. Not me. I didn't. Oh, Jesus Christ. So we're basically going to go into Nate's review for Dorcas, again recorded separately. Let's see what he thought.
Welcome to Fright Flicks, and the review of the two-part finale for Scream Queens Season 1. Possibly the two-part series finale. This remains to be seen. As of right now, the show hasn't been officially picked up. If it is picked up, it's been long rumored this would be an anthology-style show along the lines of American Horror Story, which would be next season would be fresh characters, a fresh storyline. Although from everything I've read in promotional materials, things that have been said about the show by its makers and what has ended up transpiring on the show have been two wildly different things. In trying to build hype and promote the show, a lot of things were said that were going to happen, none of which really did. Me and Mike are going to look at this two-part season finale in two parts. It is not a double-length episode. It is two individual episodes that were just shown back-to-back. This became very apparent at the end of the first hour, where there was an ending which would have had some punch. It lost it all because you just had to wait a commercial break and then the truth was revealed. If you had to sit on it for a week and speculate, would have been a lot better. So we're going to look first at the episode called Dorcas, and then finally the final episode entitled The Final Girls. So let's get started with Dorcas. The episode kicked off immediately where the previous episode ended, was Pete confessing seemingly to being a murderer. This episode starts with him fully confessing elaborately and in great detail his involvement as one of the Red Devil killers. He was brought into the conspiracy of killers later. He was a late addition. He came in off the bench, so to speak. So he doesn't really count as being the final killer, just one of them. It all ties into his obsession with Chanel Oberlin, which we heard about at the very beginning of the season. Now we get some depth on that, and it doesn't look good for Pete. She tricked him into dressing up like a caveman, more specifically Daryl Hannah from Clan of the Cave Bear, funny reference, just to be humiliated by the Chanels, which the scene didn't really play as humiliating as they wanted it to, just because, I mean, come on, Pete, that is all on you, buddy. You're a human male, and that is asked of you by somebody like Chanel, and you do it. You can't blame them for preying on your stupidity, you know? That's what they do. So anyway, after that flashback, he details the people he killed, including Boone. It was a genuine surprise. I really didn't see it coming. Even last week when he ended by saying that he was a murderer, I thought that was a red herring. But no, it wasn't a red herring. He actually was shooting from the hip. The scene ends, by the way, with the Red Devil jumping out of the closet and stabbing him to death, and almost, it would seem, attacking Grace, but Grace doesn't get killed for reasons that they go into later. The logistics of the scene, I'm sure Mike is going to get into this in great detail. Mike is more of the fine detail guy, and I'm more of a broad strokes guy, but sometimes those details really jump out at me. Seeing as how minutes before Pete had opened the closet and stood there staring at that Red Devil costume, apparently he didn't realize that there was someone in the costume as he was staring at it. I'm not sure. But the killer was nice enough to let him fully confess and do his full speech and then jump out and kill him at the end. It was definitely a surprising way to start off the episode, but I said it at the time, while I was watching it, that it didn't feel right. Was Pete lying? Nope, no, Pete wasn't lying. Pete was telling the truth. The scene just didn't feel right to me. I wouldn't be surprised to find out that was a late addition. Like, relatively recently, they decided to just shoehorn that in there because they used it as a catch-all to answer a lot of questions, and also to, strangely enough, pull some of the murderous responsibility off the weight of the final reveal. Interestingly enough, shifting the blame, so to speak, to Pete. Didn't work for me. Was well executed, and I accept it. I'm not going to dump all over it, but it just felt off. Alright, from there, we go into the missive from Chanel to the rest of the Kappa sisters, which gets released publicly and goes viral and makes Chanel the most hated woman in America. Couple of problems with this. First of all, you're heading into the home stretch and you introduce like an altogether new story, and then only to instantly abandon it. It was a skit playing off the infamous sorority letter that leaked, which go to Funny or Die and look up Michael Shannon. He reads the letter dramatically. It's amazing. They play on that with Chanel, tearing her Kappa sisters a new one. The thing is, though, that having watched Chanel rip people new ones all season, this one really wasn't that bad. It wasn't that offensive. Didn't make any sense at all that it would go viral. I understand that this is on Fox. They can't have hard swearing. You don't need to have hard swearing. You can bleep things out. That gives all the weight of a swear word without having the swear word. She needed to swear. She needed to cuss and really rip into people to sell this. Emma Roberts, she did the best she could. The letter itself was weak. The segment was weak. Storyline was weak, and it really added nothing. It was just some filler, which is sad. Your penultimate episode, and you've got filler. Speaking of filler, the Red Devil hijacks a pizza man and straps explosives to him and sends him into the house. There's a bit of thrill, and it's a really cool scene when the pizza man explodes, blood goes everywhere, Red Devil mask shoots up in the air. It's badass. It was more filler, though. It really didn't have anything to do with anything, but it was a cool visual, so that's why it was there. Comedy-wise, one of the high points of the episode was Wes Gardner having been dispatched by his daughter Grace to go seduce Dean Munch, to distract her while Grace and Zayde dig through her private school records to find out who the real killer is. Oliver Hudson, he's been funny all season. He delivers here again, showing off his dad bod. It's funny, we were watching it, and Mike says to me, is it weird that I say that he doesn't have a nice body? He doesn't have a nice body, but that is honestly what made the scene funny. Him in them little underwear, putting them moves on Munch by using his mutant ability to create the perfect playlist. Very funny stuff. Those two actors, Hudson and Jamie Lee Curtis, good chemistry together, really funny scene. The episode is called Dorcas, and that's after Melanie Dorcas. She was the previous Kappa president who, in the intro to the first episode, we saw her get doused with acid from her spray tan. One of the, if not the first victim of the Red Devil, and she falls under suspicion. Chanel believes that Melanie has come back to get revenge against Kappa for what happened to her. The Chanels end up tracking Melanie down and coming face to face with her, and it was a funny storyline, well done. It allowed them several really good horror references. For one scene, it actually felt like the show was made by horror fans, so that was kind of cool, including, high point to me, a sweet diss on Jason Goes to Hell. I'll take the time out just to highlight this, if only because Mike is working on a theory that the makers of the show listen to us here at Frightflix and they hate our guts, and they're intentionally messing up their show and putting in digs at us in their show, and this is one of them. In the first thing that we ever recorded for Frightflix, we discussed our 5 favorite horror movies ever. Inexplicably, Mike's number 2 pick, his second favorite horror movie of all time, is Jason Goes to Hell. So it was particularly funny to me and maddening to him that what was it? Chanel number 3 says that Jason Goes to Hell was the only Friday the 13th movie she's seen, and Emma Roberts' response to that was actually beautiful. That was the only one you'd seen. It's like what's a good example? You've never seen any of the Godfather movies except for the Bollywood reimagining musical version that they did. Like, that's your only Godfather. So, funny line. I'm sure it didn't jump out at anybody else in America, but it did to me. Wasn't lost on me. Funny stuff. Even funnier if it was a dig at Mike. So somebody affiliated with the show, I'm at NateFlix on Twitter. Let me know. Another good thing about this was, obviously, the writers, or maybe just the set designer, was a big fan of the Hannibal series. I'm glad to see that I wasn't the only one who loved what they did on Hannibal, because the Mason Verger references were real strong with the set design and how Melanie was presented, with the big mastiff dogs prowling around the house. Really clever, funny stuff, and good scene. And then we wrap up the episode by finding Hester having been stabbed in the eye with one of Chanel Oberlin's shoes. She wakes up only to point the finger at Abigail Breslin, Chanel number 5, and say that she is the Red Devil killer. Fade out. Good ending. ... After the fade back in, like 2 minutes later, they completely negate that last scene. So, like I was saying earlier, had they split this up and shown these a week apart, that ending probably would have really had some punch. But the fact that they immediately invalidated that ending, and then, I'll be honest, the worst part about this episode was that they showed it back to back with The Final Girls, the next episode, which is, I'll just give you a little sneak preview of what's to come. The Final Girls is easily, far and away, and by a wide margin, the worst episode of Scream Queens ever. It was so stinky that this episode, which was pretty good, just sitting next to it, got a little stinky itself. Still, based on its own merits, we rate every episode here on a scale of 1 to 10. I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10. I may be overrating it a little bit, but there were a lot of funny moments. And for me, Scream Queens works best when it allows everybody to be funny and ridiculous, and they don't worry so much about the plot and the story, which the more you think about it, the more ridiculous it is. So it's best to just not think about it that much, right? Real torn about the Pete stuff at the beginning. It did answer a lot of questions. Big ups to that, and it was a surprise. Big ups for that. Still, just didn't feel legit to me. That said, still a solid episode, 7 out of 10. My MVP for this episode is going to be somebody that I've barely mentioned at all during this review, Abigail Breslin, because she wasn't given very much to do in this episode. But that's actually why she earns it, her reactions. Of anybody on the show, like for the season, she's going to get the most improved. The first couple of episodes, she was just sort of there, she was whatever. The back half of this season, though, boy, she's been great. And it's her nonverbal stuff. her fidgeting, and the inflection in her lines. She's great, and she makes every scene better by virtue of being in it, even if she doesn't have a line. Abigail Breslin, MVP for this one, and in general, this is partially for this episode and partially just to give props for her collective work. Overall, no one person really stood out above and beyond this episode, I don't think. Still though, Pete and the Pizza Man, those are the only people that died this episode. There are still a lot of characters left. We've still got the final killer to reveal. Is it really Abigail Breslin? I don't know, but bound to have a bloodbath in the finale. It's bound to be crazy as hell. Everything is going to get settled, or is it?
Okay, so that was Nate's review of Dorcas. Now I'm going to go into mine. I thought that this episode started out really well. Like, I mean, granted, I'll fully admit how upset I am that I was wrong about a lot of stuff, but specifically last episode I said, oh, it's going to be revealed that Pete didn't really have anything to do with anything, and it's just this big red herring, and the killer, is going to jump out. Okay, so we get into this episode, and right off the bat, basically, Pete's like, oh yeah, I am the Red Devil. And I remember just feeling like, okay, well, I mean, that's obviously not true. How's the show going to work itself out of that? As upset as I am about being wrong, I kind of hate being wrong. That's fine, because with this episode in general, and especially this whole Pete thing, and I'll get into more on what the Pete thing means overall, and how I feel about all that, and how I feel like it might not ring exactly true. But anyway, to get the jolt from this episode and from Scream Queens and everything, from a genuine surprise, like holy shit, like who expected that to, I mean, I guess some people did, but I didn't, to get a genuine surprise. And so, I mean, I was feeling pretty good. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to have to admit that I'm wrong, but this is all going really well. Where all this goes, I mean, once we've eventually put up whatever that reaction video is, that's a whole nother story in and of itself, which I might get into in the next video. But anyway, when you see the reaction video, like, I'm like, fuck, and I have to literally, like, jump up and start, like, grabbing pens and paper and, like, writing shit down to, like, try and keep track. I'm like, fuck, what are we learning? What does this mean? Da, 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 da. So, I mean, it was great. It was crazy. It was fun. It was, like, right off the bat, just right into this stuff. And I thought Diego, the guy who plays Pete, did a really fun, I guess you could say, job. He hasn't been, so great at most things, but he does a really good job of capturing that whole killer reveal, personality switch type thing that's really, like, jarring and creepy and cool. And but I mean, I still wasn't quite buying it. I was like, well, what's the show playing? Like, where's the twist of, oh, it's not actually Pete type stuff, da 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 da. And then they do the fucking reveal where she's like, well, who did you kill? And he's like, he just gives a look, and then it's doom, 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 and all the lights down in the corridor, in the tunnels turning on, and we get a great fucking visual, which, by the way, we don't get in the second part, the second episode, but we get this great visual that this is what we wanted from the episode, of Pete walking towards us in slow motion, basically, in the Red Devil costume with just the mask not off. It's like, oh wow, yes, we get to see who's behind a mask. This is awesome. And then when he goes up and he's like, oh, I did kill Roger, and you see him, it was like, oh fuck, like, this is great shit here. Like, it's so jarring and so surprising and so brutal. Like, that's one of the things that really stuck out to me, is like the nail gun is probably the most, like, brutal kill of the whole series thus far. Like, usually they're really quick, but to do that, like, over and over, and then, I mean, and this might factor into the whole idea that it's kind of like Pete wasn't supposed to be overall the killer, but I'll go into that maybe a little bit later, and then big into the last episode where I have a big theory about everything altogether. And And so Pete, like, think about that. He's just like, tuk, 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 after the guy's basically already fucking dead, tuk, 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 and totally unloads that nail gun in him. Now, this, again, seems a little inconsistent with Pete feeling bad that he's a, killer. But that's the other cool thing about the scene is he's really, like, intense and believes in it, and then he's kind of going back on it like a fucking crazy person would. So, I mean, that was pretty cool. That was pretty awesome. He starts, like, quoting Nietzsche, and, like, well, I love that because whatever. And Grace, like, you're a killer, you don't have to be a douche. Like, fucking, it was a great mixture of, like, scares, surprises, and they still kept the humor in it, One thing I kind of didn't like is when he just, like, offhandedly reveals that he's the one who killed the cop with the crossbow, but that was self-defense. Okay, well, duh. And he says he just has bad aim, so I guess he was aiming for Denise. What the fuck ever, who cares? That's like a slight minor misstep in an overall pretty damn good scene. Which brings me actually to, I'm just going to get this out of the way right now, the episode MVP. Nate picked Chanel number 5, and I mean, it was definitely up in the air, and maybe the only reason, no, I would have picked him anyway, but the only reason I don't pick Chanel number 5, and I'm going to go with Pete as my MVP, is that it was all so worth it, and he really, he pulls this off. As silly as some of this stuff is, he really pulls it off. Pete's never really gotten MVP nearly ever. He always usually gets, like, worst of the episode. So I want to give it to him for that, but also the little flashback thing of Pete collecting all the DNA from everyone, that is a funny little bit right there. I mean, this whole scene basically wraps itself up. I mean, we all saw it. I'm not going to recap too much. But anyway, he's about to tell who the killer is. Killer jumps out of the closet, stabs him, blah, blah, blah. So, great intro. But here's where the problems start leaking into stuff. Not very well thought out. And this doesn't necessarily have to do with any of the Pete stuff. It has to do with the overall killer. And again, I'll go into that in the next video and stuff like that. But anyway, the plot holes start emerging. And in this case, it's more just silly than plot holes. So, the killer, who, whatever, fuck it, just for the fun of it, I'm not going to reveal who the killer is. So, the killer is hiding in the Red Devil costume inside Pete's closet this entire time. Which, actually kind of makes sense, being that it's revealed at the very end that the killer didn't really kill anybody else and doesn't plan on killing anybody else. That maybe they were working themselves up, just were more spying to make sure he didn't reveal. So, I mean, that kind of makes sense, but I mean, think about the silly little plot holes in this. Pete had just been on his cell phone talking to, unless it's the Chad theory, which, if this show doesn't get renewed type thing, and I'll go into that, was talking to, whatever, fuck it, who cares? Hester. He's talking to Hester on the phone. So, being that Hester is in the closet, so Hester's in his closet, that small ass space, talking to him on the cell phone, and he doesn't hear her. What makes no sense, guys, at all. Very silly, actually. Then Pete opens the closet, and we called it last episode, one of the few things that we called, but I mean, how did he not know that there's somebody in that costume? Did he not bother to poke it? And then there's time in between when Grace got there, so, like, just Hester's in. I mean, I guess, again, it kind of makes sense if Hester's not there to kill. She's just there to spy. This is all so fucking flimsy. But we'll get into, again, more of that flimsiness, plot holes, viewer questions, all that stuff. So, yeah, just waiting there forever, finally pops out, kills him. Okay, whatever. That scene's over. In retrospect, there's some silly stuff, but it was a good scene. So then we move on to the whole Chanel being hated thing. And Nate's already gone over this. I'm not going to go over this very much. But one of my major criticisms is the scene just goes on forever. And this was our first indication that they were starting to play for time. Now, I get the whole, it was a joke on the one chick and, yeah, the Michael Shannon reading this stuff. But didn't really make sense for a few reasons, just because it's not what she said, no matter how long she went on for. That, and by the way, I have to give props to the director, Brad Buckler or whatever. All the contrivances of the script, he did his damn best. Like, again, Pete in the tunnel, in the Red Devil, in slow motion, all of that. He really made a lot of the visuals. And he does here too, because the scene just goes on and on. He starts writing the words that Chanel is writing, has them written here, there, everywhere, all over the place. And it's pretty cool. It's a good way to, like, get us through all of that. But the problem with it is what Chanel's saying that makes everybody in the world basically hate her, and even Obama's talking about it. It's nothing compared to what we've heard Chanel say to people before. So, kind of falls a little bit flat. What's interesting, and kind of a little side thing in this, is that if everybody knows about it, then Dean Munch would have heard this. And no one points out, let alone Dean Munch, that she's also talks in this tirade about meeting up to kill the Dean. Like, she fully lays down her plan. She laid down a plan that she was planning to murder Dean Munch. And nobody gives a shit, let alone Dean Munch. Like, that just totally goes by. Again, not really covering all your tracks, but we'll see how that plays out. So then that leads to the whole Chanel trying to kill herself, which then the show gets back basically on track. And overall, I mean, spoiler alert, I really liked this episode, and I don't mean to talk too bad about it. This was a good episode. If it would have played by itself, and that's why we're reviewing it separately, this would have been a good episode, and it is a good episode. I like this one because we get good Scream Queen stuff, like Chanel trying to kill herself, and she orders a snake online, which ends up being a garter snake, and it has literally a sweater wrapped around it. Like, that is fucking funny, and that is classic. Then we get the whole Zayday and her thing together. I mean, that makes sense for the two characters, and it's fun, and it all feels like it's leading somewhere. And then Red Devil shows up. As we know, it ends up just being the pizza guy. But this is something that bothered me a little bit too, is there was a shot in the preview that we all saw, and we were really all excited about, where Zayday pulls the mask off the Red Devil. And in slow motion, she's like reacting huge to this. One, that shot's not in the actual episode. And two, that is not Zayday's reaction. Like, she doesn't know who the guy is. She doesn't give a shit who the guy is. She's not surprised at all. There's no react. So, like, that shot was put in there just to be able to put it into the preview. A little bit of a cheat. I'm sorry. It is. Kind of rubs me the wrong way. But anyway, other than that, this pizza guy scene, this was very cool. The explosion, this is what we were looking for. This is entertaining. This is big. This is, it really feels like the final episode of something. Like, it's pretty, epic's a big word, of course, but it's epic in Scream Queen's terms. Like, that was pretty cool. Again, I'm going to keep criticizing everything because this is just the way that it goes. Why, if you were going to have somebody be in that costume and do that whole thing, why not have it be somebody that we know? Now, okay, I'm not saying it needed to be like a main character, although that would have been really cool. Why couldn't it have at least been Eugene Melman, you know? Why couldn't it have been Cliff Wu? Why couldn't it have been, Tommy, the guy who the girls fought in the cafeteria? Why at least couldn't it have been a character, Detective Chisholm, that we knew before? There was an opportunity to, at the very least, do this for us. And they just bring in the pizza guy and just kind of like, okay, yeah, this is what it means. All right, whatever. So, what I really liked about this scene was pretty much right afterwards, all the Chanels getting together. That was classic Scream Queens. That was all good. And Chanel 5 and Chanel 3 really kill it in this scene. Chanel 5 is the funniest she's probably ever been. That she is falling the fuck apart over the pizza guy exploding in front of her, which is so funny. Nobody else seems to really give a shit and wants her to just get over it so they can... Too funny. But yeah, this scene between the three of them was Scream Queens in perfect form. So, again, this is definitely a positive in all these episodes. Then we go to Grayson West talking. And this is also a good scene. This is something, again, I wanted to point out. Director Brad Buckler, whatever, that's just what I'm going to start calling him, is this guy's good. This guy does something. Just watch for this. This is an interesting little thing. As a director, what you want to try and do, if you can, is give people business in scenes. This is what they, people cooking, people getting dressed, stuff like that. You want to give a little extra something for them to do. And this scene, which is again dialogue heavy, that's your job as a director. And this guy does something that I thought was really cool, where all this nonverbal, probably not in the script, is Wes comes over, feels bad for Grace, so he puts a shot of liquor down in front of her and a glass of water in front of him. Now, neither one of them ever acknowledge it in dialogue or anything, but at one point Grace reaches over and switches them and is basically why are you trying to get, and Grace drinks the water. And that is just so fun. That's just a character bit. That's great. I bet you that is all basically the director. Look for stuff like that. That's really a lot of fun for what people do in scenes. And it was pretty perfect. And then Wes goes into some pretty funny stuff where she's like, we need to find out who the killers are. We know it's one of these 5. And he says, oh, well, why don't we torture them? That would have been really interesting. But, of course, they don't do that. They're good people now, which is unfortunate for my theory, but still. And he says, oh, well, why don't we just wait in here and wait for the Red Devil to kill the other 4, and then we'll know who it is. Again, very smart, very fun. This was a funny, clever little episode. And then basically we move over to them going to Dorcas' house. And I have a few theories about the whole Dorcas thing. And again, this feeds into my bigger, my bigger theory on everything, which I'll go into more in the next episode. But it's a fun little scene. And as Nate pointed out, they make a Jason Goes to Hell reference. Now, Nate says that I'm working on a theory that the writers of the show watch this or listen to this and intentionally put jabs against me. Now, I'm not crazy. I'm pretty crazy, but I'm not that crazy. I don't actually think that. But, it is still kind of funny that would be in there. But whatever. I'm not actually crazy enough to think that. But it was a fun reference, and it's cool that it was in there. That whole scene also kind of didn't go anywhere. But again, maybe I'll talk about some of that later. So we move on to what is probably one of the best bits of comedy in all of Scream Queens, where Wes has to divert the dean's attention by seducing her. Now, this was fucking great. This was Wes finally being able to, Oliver Hudson being able to play broad, and he plays broad perfectly. This scene was goddamn hilarious, and I loved everything about it. Like I said, Nate goes into it. Nate talks about how I turned to him at one point, and I'm like, dude, is it weird that think that, he should have had a nicer body or something? It was just too funny, yeah, that he's in these, skimpy ass fucking, Black Velvet, probably, which is a joke. Remember episode 5? He loves that song. But anyway, and he's just paunchy and fucking just too fucking trying to act that I need to get sent to the dean. Come on, this is classic fucking Scream Queens. One thing about the aftermath of that, when they're sitting together, which is kind of our first indication of my theory, again, that I'll go into next episode, is we start to get the first bits of all of this. And where Wes says to her, oh, I'm in love, and now we're going to have a whole thing, and she agrees to it, but she says something that a little bit interesting. So she says, oh, we need to get rid of Grace. We have to figure out a way to get her out of our lives. Then the show totally drops that. That is never brought up again. That is never mentioned again. It never factors into anything ever. That's interesting, don't you think? You guys probably all noticed that too. I have a theory on why that happened. One little funny thing, though, is that you gotta love Dean Munch, is that she finds Grace unbearably annoying. Like, I like that Grace is, well, I mean, we all think she's basically unbearably annoying, although I've grown to really like her just because I thought she was the killer, and now I don't know what to think of her. But I just think that that's funny that, like, somebody who's a genuinely good person and is genuinely, like, trying to find out who the killer is and all this, is to Jamie Lee Curtis unbearably annoying that she's a good person. I fucking love that. That's, again, perfect Scream Queen stuff. And then we end the episode with Hester getting the shoe in her eye, which we got Pete killed in this episode, which was a major kill. We got the pizza guy blowing the fuck up, which was an awesome, gory, crazy, fun kill. And we get a gory shot of a stiletto heel in Hester's eyeball. This episode delivered on gore, kills, surprises, twists, intensity, characters, character interactions changing and shifting, Zayday and Chanel, Wes and Nadine. This episode really, when you look at it separately and the second viewing, it really does hold up. And this is a good episode. I did a poll on our Twitter. Make sure to follow us on Twitter because I put up a lot of stuff up there, which, you know, it'll be an extra little heads up, and I'll probably be doing it long after Scream Queens videos here are over, so definitely make sure to follow us. But I put a poll up, and the poll was, did you like the two-part final or not? And the poll results came back, 51% loved it, and 49% hated it. Like, seriously, it was fucking one bit away from 50-50 split. Now, you could argue that it's the last episode would have gotten the same reaction, maybe, and maybe I'll do a separate poll for that. But that's what made me think, oh yeah, we need to review these separately, because this episode, that's why everyone, basically the general consensus everyone's been sending me is, I'm confused. No fucking shit. I understand that. I'm still confused. I still don't have an idea of exactly what I think about everything. We're going to do the season review, and in the next episode, like I said, I'm going to get into this bigger theory type thing, which helped me like the episodes a little bit better. But we'll see. And it's all contingent on something. But this episode, yes, when viewed alone, this is a good episode. This still carries on everything that we've liked, everything that we've enjoyed. Dorcas is Scream Queens running at a good fashion. Nate gave it a 7, again, just because of the stank of the following episode. And I'm going to give it a good 8, just to elevate it a little bit more. And it's as good as any other episode, if not better. There is some really funny, really good stuff in here. I like Dorcas quite a bit. I'm going to give it 8 out of 10. MVP goes to Pete. Who would have ever thought? Good stuff. Okay, so that's basically the end of this video. Again, we're going to do a 2-part final killer theory thing for these 2-part finals. There's still a lot to work through, and I still have to edit and all these kind of good things. So that will probably be up tomorrow night. So make sure you look out for our video Killer Theories 2-part final for the final girls. And that is going to be a hell of a video, because I have a lot of plot holes to point out. We have to do our reviews. We have viewer questions that I'm going to get into. Don't worry, guys, if you were waiting for that in this one. Everyone who sent me their questions and comments, I'm going to get into that in the next episode. And like I said, that will be up tomorrow night. Make sure you watch for it. Let us know what you thought of this episode. And actually, another thing you can comment underneath, which episode do you think you liked better? Like, do you think that the Final Girls was as good as this one? This one was better, this one was worse. Just let me know what you thought of Dorcas specifically. Alright, and we will see you tomorrow night with more good stuff here on Fright Flicks and Scream Queens. Later on, guys.